Hello and welcome to our Friday live stream. Today we're going to be talking about MIDI and integrating your pedal board best with MIDI devices. And originally we were going to do this from the workstation out in the garage like we have in the last couple of weeks. That's been really fun. However, it is a rare rainy day in California. And when I tried to leave the garage door open, we were just getting pummeled by sort of horizontal rain, and so in effort to keep all the electrical equipment dry, I had to migrate back inside. But I think we can still do a good job of illustrating some of the things that deal with MIDI and getting people comfortable with the idea of how to actually utilize this on their switcher system. So let me pull a couple of MIDI pedals off the wall so we can kind of we can explore. We're gonna do a Chase Bliss pedal. We're gonna do the Overture, which is a really great overdrive. See, do I have any other MIDI stuff here? We'll start there because that represents actually two different types of MIDI that are fairly common. So this is the standard type that we see like on RJM. This is like a 5-pin DIN. Some people will just call this a MIDI connector, but it's really a DIN connector that's just MIDI protocol, because you could also have MIDI on something like a Chase Bliss pedal that's just 1/4 inch, just like this, using TRS. And what we'll talk about, and what's also described in one of our videos, which is how to make your own MIDI cables. We have a really excellent video that, if I do say so myself, that wasn't at all humble. But we have a good video that really goes through it in depth. I'll bring it up here on the screen. So if you're sincerely curious about how to do it, we have some nice diagrams. Let's see, where did that diagram go? Build your own MIDI. Here it is. I'm pulling it up on YouTube, but you could also pull it up on your computer. Let me just make sure that I have. All right, here it is. Pulling it up. So this is it, how to build a MIDI cable, and we go through all the details here. So if you really want to get into get into it deep, you can come here and it'll show you everything you need. I mentioned where to get all the plugs and the connectors and all that stuff. So if you do want to get into it, you can always check out the video that we have on it. But I want to kind of go through some of the particulars. But we have basically two different types, and actually one of these contingencies wasn't covered in that video. So you have the ordinary 5-pin DIN like you have on the RJM, you have on Strymons, you have on the majority of historical MIDI products. And then a lot of people are now getting into doing the 1/4 inch. And the reason why is that for MIDI, for most cases that we see in the guitar world, are really only using a shield and 2 conductors, and really in most cases are just using 2 conductors. And so you can get away with doing the TRS because you don't have all 5 pins that are being activated on a 5-pin DIN. We're only really using 3 of them. So that's why the TRS works. And in some cases, we also see pedals now like the new Boss 200 series, like the MD 200 and the DD 200. Those are using 1/8 inch TRS. And it's the same sort of idea as the 1/4 inch TRS like we see here on the Chase Bliss. It's just brought into an 1/8 inch jack because that conserves a lot of space, allows them to have a MIDI out and a MIDI through without needing to accommodate these big honking jacks that take up significantly more space than if they were a 1/4 inch or an 1/8 inch. The protocol is really all the same, and there is some people that play some games with maybe how the regular MIDI protocol is done. Like Maris is a little bit non-standard as far as the assignments of where things would ordinarily go and sort of the standardized MIDI way of doing things. But if you're their pedals still can serve great functions. So I'm not to be dogmatic about. I'm not here to be dogmatic about the MIDI protocols and who's implementing them in the way that it was originally intended or not. There's lots of different ways to do it. But the big important things that I think people need to know about MIDI if they're going to be doing the DIY route is they need to have the right materials. So my favorite cable to do this is the Mogami 2552. So I'm going to bring that up on the screen so you can kind of see what I like to use. We're going to go to, let's see if our friends at Bestronix have it, because that's a really great company. But I don't think that they do have it. Or if they do, it's not showing up. So we're going to go to Redco for this. So here is the Mogami 2552. And this is ordinarily what I'll use for anything that's related to mic cables. I'll use this for anything related to MIDI and even TRS. This is a great, small, and compact mic cable. Now, I know what you might be saying already is that, if you have a 5-pin DIN, you only have a shield, and then you have 2 center conductors. So we're talking twisted pair shielded here. And as I said earlier, you don't actually need to have all 5 pins activated. Typically, the 2 outside pins are never, ever used, especially in our application. We're just using the shield that's almost always connected to the middle center pin. And then you can assign the clear insulated center conductor or the red insulated center conductor to either the left or right pin of center. It doesn't matter as long as they match 1-to-1. And then you can match this up if this were going to a TRS, let's say MIDI to TRS. Usually it's a similar way that you would do an XLR where pin 2 is usually the hot or the plus. So you can use that designation to determine which one is going to be the tip on the reciprocal TRS plug or 1/8" plug if you're going to use like a Boss style. And even here they give you a suggested application, which is the square plug. I really like this a lot if you need a low profile like right angle TRS plug if you're going to do a MIDI to TRS. And the other one that I'll use frequently is Switchcraft TRS for right angle. Let's see I forget which number it is. Switchcraft TRS. Let's see if I'm sure they have it here. I think they have everything. I actually don't see the right angle version. How about that? Well, they have a pancake version, but I'd say if you're at pancake, you might as well just get the other version that I showed you from Square Plug because it's lower profile than this. I guess they don't have the standard version that I'm thinking of. It kind of looks like a 226, but it's TRS. So like this is a 226 here. It looks just like this, but it's a TRS version. So I would say whatever number that is, maybe somebody can chime in here in the comments and state what the actual number is for the TRS version. But it looks exactly like this. It says TRS. I'll use that in some cases, or in the worst case, what I'll do if I need something that's like low profile, like a SP5 or an SPS4 or something like that, what I'll do is I'll buy this Switchcraft 297 and I'll just take off this housing. Like I'll cut this piece down on in terms of like the lugs, the solder lugs. I'll cut these down so they're shorter. I'll remove this housing, and then I'll also buy with it a Switchcraft. Is it a 380 is the number? I think it's a 380. I need to brush up on my Switchcraft. Yeah, and then I buy a 380, which is the short barrel version, and this has a much smaller housing, and then I'll just stick that housing on there because the threading is exactly the same. So you can basically get a miniaturized housing even though it's TRS if you need that as far as like a TRS in or an out. That can be a kind of it's expensive because you have to buy 2 plugs, but it looks right, which for some of us is half the battle if you're a little OCD like me. These are great. The other ones that I really like for DIN, I like the Switchcraft. I wonder if they're going to call these MIDI or they're going to call them DIN. Let's start with DIN and see what we get. Don't like them. Let's try MIDI. No, don't like that either. All right, let's try Switchcraft MIDI right angle and see what we get. Because I want to show you my favorite plugs. Here they are. let's go to our, let's go back to Redco again. So this one is one that we use almost all the time when you see any of the rig builds, and this is pretty cool because it's called a clocking jack, which means that it can move to any position or most of the positions of the clock. And so you can see here it gives you all the different angles that it could possibly be. This really allows you a lot of flexibility if you're using pedals that have jacks that are really close together. So for example, if we're thinking about, let's say, like this particular orientation here, we have two MIDI connectors right next to each other. Like, you couldn't have them both pushing in at each other or even both going one direction. You couldn't really have them both going hard right or hard left. If you have a clocking jack like this, you can adjust the positions of the two MIDI connectors so they can really be in any configuration that you want. That's a really handy thing to have. And so this Switchcraft to me is the superior MIDI connector, especially in a right angle application if you're going to do it. Now, conversely, there's a straight version, and it looks like they don't show them here. What are they calling how are they categorizing these? They're categorizing under MIDI. The other one I would say to use is the Rian, which is Neutrich's sort of like sister brand, straight connector. Now, a lot of times if there's something that is maybe where you're using all straight connections like SPS4s or SPS5s and you need a straight connection MIDI because you don't have the clearance to use a right angle, this is when I'll use this. The other thing too that some people will do, and I'm going to zoom in here, you'll often see people take off the strain relief, the rubber strain relief there, if they need to have a little extra clearance, because there's quite a bit of room between where the cable connects to the DIN connectors internally to where this rubber strain relief is. So if you need to remove that to make a little bit more space, you can build up some heat shrink here just to eliminate the lateral movement. And you already get all of your strain relief from a pull from the internal clamp that's in here, so you don't really have to worry about a pull so much. The strain relief is really only helping in regard to the lateral movement. Let's see if we can get a closer in picture of this internally, so you can kind of get an idea what I'm talking about when I say the clamp. Here's a good example of it on Thoman's site, a dealer of ours as well. So if you look on their example here, you can see that there's a clamp right here that's going to clamp around like the Mogami 2552 or whatever other option cable you might use. And when I was talking about the three center pins as being the only ones that are used, that's basically 1, 2, and 3. These two outside guys aren't used, so you can get away with using that TRS connector. This is great in tight spaces, and again, you can remove this rubber piece here if you need to be able to make a little bit more space. And remember this part here where you see that there's like a little bit of like a kind of like a shelf or it kind of cuts off slightly. This is all going to be typically buried inside of the pedal or the switcher. The only part that's going to be extended is the line slightly above where it says Rian, and then right where the rubber meets the end of the housing. So it's going to significantly reduce the depth of the connector. So do feel free to remove the rubber if you feel like you need to give yourself more clearance, and you can build up this strain relief with some heat shrink to remove the lateral movement, because again, you already have that clamp here to eliminate any pulls for any sort of front to back movement as opposed to like a side to side or any type of pull. So those are all good things to know. Things that people have any questions or clarifications on as far as MIDI is concerned, in terms of we haven't really talked much about the application, but as far as the actual execution of the cables, is there anything that it's questionable for you at this point as far as the best way to do it? Material resources, again, our video on it, and I'll throw it in the chat right now. This is probably your best resource in order to be able to utilize all the products that we talked about and how to actually solder them together. I can't do a soldering tutorial, unfortunately, in here, and I was going to show you a little bit more in depth. Maybe we can do that next week, weather permitting. We've had a kind of a wet week here in Oakland, so I apologize that we can't do it from the garage today as I had originally planned. but I think that the video will take you quite a bit of the way there. Let's just check, see how we're doing here. Hey, Jeffrey, Gabby Bergman. What about running a boss or a Strymon to change another? I'm not sure what that means, Jeffrey. Can you clarify that? Let's see. MIDI cables, they want to need to have been out of stock everywhere. I wonder if you're trying to find the 2552. It looks like they were in stock there with Redco. Can I use all 5 pins for the HX Stomp? Yeah, I think the HX Stomp only does 5 pins, so I don't think you have an option for TRS. Any questions before we move on? I think the next thing that we might move into is how we can adapt things like if you have several Chase Bliss audio pedals like this that don't have throughs, how do you go about combining them? This is a question that we often have. So like something like the RJM, you have a MIDI in and then you have a MIDI out or a through that you can use to then continue to transmit the MIDI signal onto other devices. Whereas with something like this, the Chase Bliss, you just have the MIDI input. You don't have a way to continue the path. And so what do you do in those cases where you're not able to continue the path? If it's just one pedal like this, it's not so big of a deal because you could make this the very last pedal and the MIDI doesn't have to come back into the MIDI input on the switcher or anything like that. You just are going to continue. It's going to end with the last pedal, and that's going to be the last place that receives the MIDI. A really important thing that people often sleep on, there's a couple of companies that are doing this. One that allows you to basically split out and allows you to go into multiple MIDI devices from one MIDI output, which is really cool. Is this device. It's been around for a while. It's called the MIDI Solutions Quadra Through. And so basically what it does is it has a single MIDI input here that you can see. So that would, like, let's say go from your RJM switcher, would go out and go into this thing. And then on the opposing side, and it's a little bit hard to see, maybe I'll give you a top view. From the opposing side, it has 4 different outputs. So you have a single MIDI in and then 4 MIDI outs. And then you can convert these from a MIDI to a 1/4 inch or a MIDI to the 1/8 inch. If you have a bunch of different pedals that have 1/4 or 1/8 inch MIDI jacks and you want to be able to get them all to reach the same place, this is one way that you can do it. Another way that you can do it is Strymon came out with a new device called the Conduit, and it's similar in that fashion. I'll look it up here with Sweetwater as well. Another great dealer of ours. And this one also has a MIDI through, which is pretty cool, instead of just a MIDI in. It does require that you power it, but it can produce then 4 outputs that are all 1/4 inch. And so this could go 1/4 inch to all of your Chase Bliss type devices. This could go to whatever non-traditional 5-pinned in MIDI that you want. This is a pretty cool device. I think also Disaster Area makes something like this that's a similar type thing. And I forget what it's called. Let's look. I believe they make something that's like a MIDI in. The cool thing about Disaster Area, too, is they have like every conceivable MIDI cable that's like pre-made. So you can get all the different variations of 1/4 inch to 5-pinned in that you want. I feel like they had a box that will allow you to like switch the MIDI protocol on it physically. And I'm trying to find that box. It was such a... Oh, I think this is it right here. Here it is. So this basically allows you to switch, and it tells you sort of the complementary assignment of the dip switches so that you can basically switch to any type of different MIDI capable 1/4 inch MIDI jack. So if you have an Alexander, Maris, or Empress, you would assign the dip switches for that output in this configuration. If it's using the tip in the ring active, using a TRS-Y cable, you can convert it this way. If it's a Chase Bliss audio, so this is a really cool box. In some ways, I think it's cooler than a lot of the other ones because you can do all of the programming in essence, or you can configure it any way that you want within the same box, and the cable doesn't have to change. And it gives you a pretty good lookup table here of all the different pedals that have MIDI and what it allows you to do. This is a very impressive box, I think, for sure, if you're trying to convert to some of the non-traditional, non-5-pinned in MIDI stuff. That's a pretty cool device that I definitely think people should be checking out if they don't want to just go the Strymon route, or they don't want to go the disaster area, because in essence, this basically takes all of the guesswork out. You don't have to customize a cable for each one of the possible devices. It'll actually do what you need to do from here, which is pretty cool. And you can just make all the adjustments and with the dip switches, which is pretty fancy. So I definitely am into that. Trying to think of other resources. We talked about the plugs. We talked about the Rian straights, the clocking switchcrafts. We talked about the TRS from Square Plugs, the SP550S. We talked about the switchcraft right angle version, which I forget what the name of it was. We couldn't find it on Redco. Let me just see if I can look it up for us. Switchcraft right angle TRS. Let's see if we can get this number. Ironically, Sweetwater sells it, but Redco, the cable place, doesn't. So you can get it. It's the 236. I will often use this guy in certain cases where the pancake is not workable. And then we'll also use the Switchcraft Straights TRS. And then I gave you a solution if you wanted to shorten it, if you were using it in a switcher or something like that. You could get a 380 housing, cut down the strain relief on the TRS version, and then you could the threading is compatible on the two different straight versions, whether it's the TS or TRS, and whether it's the short plug or the longer housing version. So that's pretty cool. Anything that people need to catch up on as of this point in the stream? Jeffrey came back in to clarify his question. As in running a MIDI pedal out of a Strymon Mobius or MD500 into another Strymon pedal or Boss, can you run MIDI from one to connect them all without a separate MIDI programmer? Well, you're going to need something that's actually going to be changing the MIDI programming between them. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a switcher. It could be just a small foot controller, something like a MIDI mouse even could do this, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a switcher. To give you an idea of what a MIDI mouse is, I don't even know if they still make these, but I was just trying to think of a simple thing that allows you to okay, yeah, they still do make them, I guess. Okay, so this is a MIDI mouse. So basically imagine that you can bank up and down to different things, different MIDI program changes, and it just has a single MIDI out, and then this could connect to your Strymons. You could have something as basic and elementary as this up to an RJM PBC 10. You could do any combination thereof, and most of these devices that you said all have MIDI inputs and MIDI throughs just like this. So you have a MIDI in and a MIDI through, and these will just allow connectivity across. Sometimes people will have some difficulty with certain devices maybe not talking well to each other in terms of transmitting the MIDI signal, and sometimes that does happen, in particular when they're not the same brand. Sometimes it's not an always thing, and if that happened, you could always get something like that, the MIDI Solutions Quadra through, and then that way you're just using the MIDI input of each one of those devices, and that would resolve any sort of strange issue with them not speaking to each other properly. So you could always use that if you're running into that problem, but it's pretty rare. I've only actually seen that issue twice, and it was some issue with Eventide and Source Audio, and couldn't get them to consistently transmit the program change throughout. It would stop at the H9 and then wouldn't continue. And then when we reconfigured it with the MIDI Solutions, everything worked properly. But it was on a consult. It wasn't one that I had built, so there could have been a cable issue. But it can happen. What's up, Hobo Roadie? you know if it's possible to transform a regular pedal like a specular reverb to MIDI, modification? No, there's not a modification, but there is this device that One Control makes, which is actually, I'm surprised that not more people talk about it. I'm trying to figure out where it's categorized. Let me share my screen with you. Whoa, One Control. They like their pedals al fresco. Let's see, maybe it's under switcher. So, okay, here it is. So basically what this does is it, and I was reminded of this the other day, somebody had asked me about it, and I think in one of our consults, where basically it takes a non-MIDI pedal and it allows you to control it as a MIDI loop, like an individual MIDI loop. So you can't control the presets of the actual device, but you can take it and give it a functionality that can be triggered on and off with MIDI. So this is a really cool thing if you wanted to, for example, have something that was in a MIDI loop that maybe you had maxed out or something like that, and you needed to be able to have an extra loop. This also does stereo, which is pretty cool. So like some of these are TRS in and out, so you could have this as stereo. This is a way that you can add some level of MIDI functionality to a device that doesn't have it, but it's not going to give it programmable or saved presets. So this is a cool product for that purpose. But it's not going to allow you to take your specular reverb and all of a sudden make it programmable. If it doesn't have MIDI already built into it, you can't create MIDI from it. Another problem is combining Maris and Chase Bliss pedals. If you don't need MIDI out of Maris, then Chase Bliss MIDI box will work fine. Yeah, so if you don't need the MIDI box, that's fine, but you could also use any of the devices that I showed, like the disaster area, the conduit. Those will all give you just MIDI outs, and then you would just be occupying MIDI ins on the reciprocal pedal, whether it was 2 Maris and 2 Chase Bliss, or 3 Chase Bliss and 1 Maris, any combination thereof. I just think most of them are limited to 4 outputs. And if you need MIDI out, then you need Maris MIDI IO. Yeah, so there's you could use theirs, and then you could see there's companies like Disaster Area, which have basically made a variable configuration. So if you didn't want to buy the native Maris box, this would allow you to do it as well. So there's some companies that have sort of created various versions that allow you to be able to use dip switches to configure it based on the actual way that company is deciding to do MIDI with their particular devices. So you could, use the Maris stuff if you have Maris pedals, but you could also get the Disaster Area one, and it could do Maris, Jackson Audio, Alexander pedals, fill in the blank. It can pretty much cover the entire gamut of what's out there. So that's a cool feature of what Disaster Area is doing that I really like. Let's see, Victor. The headache I have is with my setup is not so much the MIDI. It's the massive USB 2.0, 3.0 connectors. Yeah, that can be a problem for a lot of people. And we did a cool video. This was probably over a year ago. I want to see if I can find it. Let's see if I can find it here. I forget what I titled the video, but it has a cool. All right, here it is. It's this one here. This rig sounds unreal. And you can see here in the corner, there's this box that actually has a USB into it. And so what I got was a D-style USB. I think it was Neutrik. Yeah. So it looks like this. We'll blow up some images here. I can't remember whether mine was black. A couple of different companies make it, but it's just a standard D punch. And in essence, this is what I use to mount into the my interface box of choice. So this is basically, I think I riveted it, but you could also drill it. If you're using a smaller enclosure like a Hammond 1590, you're going to need to mount this sideways because vertically it won't fit. And you're really going to have to orient it toward the roof of the enclosure, because if you don't, there's like a flange on the die cast, and this can kind of hit that lip. So you just want to be aware of that. Or the other thing you could do is just get a slightly taller enclosure so that you don't have to worry about that. I think it's a 1590C, I think is a little higher. So this is what I was using. And on the opposite side, let's see if we can get a view of the other side so you kind of know what you're dealing with. It'll look like this on the other side. And these are reversible. So, for example, if you have, all right, that one's not found. Let's see if this one should work. Parts Express is a big enough company. And you can get them in different colors. You can get them in black, or you can get them in a silver colorway. But in essence, these are reversible. So you could have it where it has, this style USB on the opposite side and this side on the inside. These two sides are reversible. So you can change them up depending on what you need to do. The only trick about this is that it's difficult in a DIY sense to customize these types of USB cables. So generally you're going to be relegated to choosing something that is slightly longer than what you need. However, on Amazon, I've had good luck in finding like right angle USBs. I've had good luck finding right angle USBs that were in like all different sorts of configurations. So like this is one that I think I've bought before. And these come in different sizes, even though this one is, this one's 10 feet. They have different size versions. And you can get these right angle plugs in different configurations. So there's one where it's like straight up. There's one where it goes to the left, and there's one where it goes to the right. So you can like search around on Amazon and try to find the exact angle or pitch that you need in order to make it fit properly with your particular switcher or whatever it is that you're using. And then you buy a little bit longer than you need. And then what I would do on the enclosure is I would find like a rubber grommet. And obviously these are a bunch of different assorted sizes, but what I would do on the enclosure end is I would drill out a hole that would allow me to fit through the opposite side USB, and I would just feed the whole entire cable through a small grommet hole like this, and then I could just feed in that extra couple inches of cable. I just find the cable that was kind of like to the nearest foot that I needed, and I might have 6 or 8 inches of slack, and I kind of just feed that cable into the enclosure that has all my other inputs and outputs. It's already all insulated and everything like that, and then you can plug in the USB on that opposite end. So if you're talking about this guy on the opposite end of this, you can plug in the other side of the USB, and then you've got a USB pass-through in essence. And you've used the grommet to kind of protect you've used this grommet here to kind of protect the outer insulator of the USB cable so it doesn't wear against the metal in your enclosure. It doesn't cut through it at all. And that's what I did on that video that I kind of linked for you earlier that I showed with one of my pedal boards. I essentially did that. So it gave me a way to access the USB from the pedal board. I didn't have to try to get into the switcher itself and try to make changes from there. I could just plug it in on the outside, and then I was able to hook it right into my computer. And so that's how I did it. Because again, there is ways that you can customize your own USB cables. It's just a lot of tools, and for amateur, and kind of novice DIYers, I don't think it's worth the investment if you're going to do it like 1 time or 2 times, or even 5 times in your whole career. It's probably not going to balance out money-wise. So I would just do this. It still looks neat. It still looks clean. And if you have a couple of extra inches of USB cable that's kind of just pushed into your buffer interface box, nobody's going to see it. The grommet's going to keep it safe. and it's going to still look great and function exactly the way that you want to. So that's how I would go about doing it. Let's see, Jesse. Disaster Air's MIDI boxes have jumpers to change each output port for Chase Bliss and Merit Style. Yeah, we mentioned that, Jesse, a little earlier when I showed it, and said that was a really cool feature that sort of differentiated it from a lot of the other ones, where Disaster Area definitely took account of all the different non-standard 5-pin DIN configurations that were out there and made it so that you could buy that one box and be able to accommodate any of those different options. So yeah, I was shouting their praises. I think it's a really cool, very, very thoughtful and innovative device, especially for the time. There weren't that many options when they did that at first, so it was pretty smart. Manuel, if I want to use wireless Bluetooth MIDI to control my Zoya, would it add noise? Wireless Bluetooth MIDI. Are you talking about like using one of those like WIDI wireless MIDI type things, or are you talking about something else? Because I've only used WIDI. Had sent me some stuff to check out, and it's really cool. And I haven't experienced any noise issues with it, but I want to make sure that we're saying the same thing. But I also haven't tested it out in a lot of context to really get into it. Charles, can I use one of the Omni ports on my Morningstar MC6 to operate my Chase Bliss Mood, or do I need a separate MIDI box? I think you just need the right cable to do it. And I think that you can use, I think Disaster Area, we were just there. Let's see, Disaster Area, I believe sells that cable. Let's go to their cables. Let me share this. And so they put the compatibility. So I think is it this one? Yeah, CBA. I think it's Chase Bliss Audio. Yeah, so you can get this and you can select the length, and this will allow you to do it. And you can use that in order to facilitate your program changes and all that. So that should work just fine. And I think also Bestronix makes these as well, so you can get these from Bestronix. And then Sweetwater, I think, sells our version of this, although I don't know that I don't think we have one that's necessarily optimized. I think ours is just a 1-to-1. And also we have one for the Boss 1/8" stuff as well. I don't think ours works for this because it's slightly different than normal. So I'd suggest buying it from Disaster Area or from Bestronix. Bestronix might even OEM these for them. I'm not sure. I know they OEM for a lot of people. That's Bestronix OEM cables for tons of different brands. So it's totally possible. I would just see which one you can get the best deal from and go with them. Or if you want to support what Disaster Area is doing because they have some pretty cool ideas, that might be worthwhile. The Kai Life, I set up MIDI control with my HX Stomp controlling my C4 synth, and DMC Micro is hands down the most useful MIDI interface out there. For small applications, had to make a custom Y cable though. Very cool. Nice. Let's see, Jeffrey, not MIDI related, but I have a Boss MD500. I have a Boss MD500 or a Strymon Mobius into a DD500, but the out to the amp is mono. Do you think that the connection should be stereo? No, I would keep it all mono. If it's mono amp, I would go mono in between everything as you go. No reason to introduce the stereo if it's just going back to mono. Cool. Let's get into maybe next, as people have more questions. Let's get into some of the switchers that I'm liking these days, and we've done some videos on favorite switchers and things like that, so that you can always reference those videos. We have a cool buyer's guide over on YouTube. I guess if you're already on YouTube if you're here. Let's see. Yeah, here's our buyer's guide. So our buyer's guide is right up top here. It's which switcher is right for you. And that's a pretty cool one if you're curious about which switchers we recommend. But I want to shout out a couple of my favorite switchers that are out there. Let's go to our friends over at RJM. RJM, I think, is one of the best out there. I also want to shout out this new product that they make, which is the Effects Gizmo. Oh, I guess it already changed. Let's go back to that. The Effects, or the Mini Effects Gizmo, which is in essence the same exact thing as the PBC 6X, but it's just the switcher part of it. So it still has all of the functionality of being able to move things around. You have the 6 loops. You have MIDI in and MIDI out. This is a super cool unit. I highly recommend it. And this is really cool if you have a switcher, let's say, and you need some extra loops on it. Like, let's say you wanted to have everything be controlled by a 6X. You could expand another 6 loops by using this. This is a pretty cool feature. But overall, I think that just their products are so great. I love all the PBC stuff. The 10 is great. I would suspect that in the next year or so, we're going to see a PBC 10 with the same reordering capabilities that the 6 has. But still, this is really the gold standard, I think, for professional products. The PBC 10 is great. I love the PBC 6X. I think I have 2 different rigs with PBC 6Xs on them. Pretty unbeatable products, well built, great support. You can literally email Ron or Sherry the most bizarre technical application that is really specific to just you, and they are super responsive. I think this is great. Another one that I think is really underrated, that people are not talking about enough, and I think it's mostly a function of them just being located in a different part of the world, is the Musicom Lab Series. These are amazing switchers. So good. They don't get talked about enough. They have a couple of different versions. They have like a really small, like, I think this is a 5 mono loop version. Just absolutely incredibly well built. Made in Korea. The designer of this actually also is the designer, I believe, for Maloon Pedals, which is a Korean based effects pedal company that makes really, really great stuff as well. And just super high quality, great service. These are sold by our friends over at the Guitar Sanctuary, also a dealer of ours. This is a really great unit, and they have, of course, different sizes. That's the smallest one, and then they have this one that has 6 loops plus a volume loop, so technically 7 loops, 2 stereo loops, all reordered, available. And then they have the EFX MK6, which is 11 mono loops and 1 mono send return loop, which is pretty cool. You have 11 loops in total on this guy. Just an absolute killer device. These guys make such high quality stuff as well. I really, really like what they do. I think this is actually a newer version. I don't think I've seen the 11 loop one. It looks like it actually has some stereo loops here, which it doesn't advertise. Let's see, am I off on here? 11 mono loops and 1 mono stereo send return loop. It looks like it was more. Let's see if we can get a better picture of the back here. That's the front. Picture 3. No. So I definitely see, okay, see return 11, send 12. Okay, so there's just 1 stereo loop at the end. Now, I wonder if this is because they have this other product, which is super cool, called the Parallelizer, which is my go-to device for wet-dry wet rigs because it is a parallel mixer. You can have 3 effects, stereo effects in parallel, plus a dry blend. The reason why you put the dry here is because all the effects that are wired into this, into the back here, should all be set to 100% wet, kill dry, and then that way you can blend in the dry yourself as needed, or you could leave it 100% wet. And these are all mono sends, stereo returns. Again, when in a parallel path like this, you don't need to have stereo send, stereo return. The send is really an input mute more than anything. So this is a really, really cool device. And I wonder if that's maybe potentially why it's 11 loops except for the 12th being stereo, so you can involve the parallelizer for the parallel path for all the stereo effects to follow. And this is, again, compatible with MIDI. All these are really, really great. I highly recommend all the stuff that the guys over at Musicom Lab are making. I think it's really, really great. Let's go to a few questions here. Sweet rig timing. Hey, high wattage. Total Evo 7, have you ever tried other MIDI splitters other than MIDI Solutions, considering getting an Amptone Lab splitter, because I read somewhere that not all splitters are compatible with MIDI pedals? Well, all the stuff that we talked about today are all designed for splitting MIDI. We talked about MIDI Solutions. We talked about Disaster Area. We talked about the Strymon Conduit. And so there's several different options and different ways to go depending on what you want to do. All the ones that we talked about are compatible with MIDI. That is their explicit design. Josh, got my newly wired up board plugged in. I'm struggling to get my MIDI to work. ES8, Line 6 M9, Voodoo Lab Hex, and Digitech Whammy. I can't get any MIDI commands to work. How would you troubleshoot? So it seems like the ES8 is the controller, and then the Voodoo Lab maybe is an extension of that for additional loops potentially. So what I would do first, if I were you, is I would go MIDI out of ES8, and I would just go into the M9 input. Make sure you have continuity there. Make sure that everything's triggering the way that you want. So you've proved that the cable works. You can prove that it's sending PC and CC messages as it's supposed to the M9. Or it could be any one of these, just doing one. Then use the MIDI through of that device, still connecting the ES8 to, let's just say, the Line 6 M9, and then bring that to the Voodoo Lab Hex. Now let's see what we got. Are we able to continue to send these messages through? The other consideration is if there is some sort of issue with them talking to each other properly, you could try to introduce that MIDI solution splitter. Sweetwater has a very liberal return policy, so if you got one and you introduced it into the system and it didn't make one bit of difference, or that didn't turn out to be the issue, is that there was some sort of issue with them sending MIDI commands or messages to subsequent pedals, you could always return it. It's $49. It's a pretty low price point investment if you needed to try it. But I would start like that incrementally. Start with one pedal. Make sure that it's sending things to it. Another way to test if you feel like there may be some issues with MIDI not talking properly, you could always take the ES8, prove that it works with the Line 6 M9, take that same exact cable, go into the Voodoo Lab Hex. And if you're seeing that it's triggering, then that could mean that either you have a problem with the cable or there is some sort of issue with either the MIDI through not being activated properly, or that the pedals actually just are not communicative with each other because there is some sort of discrepancy. And sometimes I have, again, seen that in the way that some pedals interact with each other. Sometimes they don't work well with MIDI. Reading comments on the ES8, I got a friend who just complained about the parallel function, but I don't think he actually knew. I don't think he actually knew it only does two. Yeah, and I think the parallel function is, I think that in terms of using it as like a wet, dry, wet parallel function, it's not really the ideal thing for that. I think it's really better if you wanted to, try parallel overdrives or something like that. I think some people maybe overvalue what the parallel aspect actually does. Yeah, LA Sound Design was somebody that adapted the Musicom Lab, I would say, fairly early on, and so that is true. But I would say other than him, and I don't know that I see him. Maybe he still uses them a lot. I'm not really sure what his preferred switcher is. I remember kind of like the earlier part of the 2000s, early to mid, in like up until like 2010 or so. That's true. He did use them a lot. I don't really see anybody else using them that often, or certainly not as much as I see RJM around. But I think that these certainly deserve to be in the conversation in the same place as an RJM type switcher. Especially these are very cost effective, and the buffers are great. The designs are great. I think very, very cool stuff. So I would agree with that high wattage. Who can build me a bass pedal board? Vince has thrown his name in the hat, or his name in the ring. So let's you can check out Vince. We're actually going to be doing a video which includes Vince from Vagabond Audio as one of the several builders around the world that people can contact about this. We are going to start offering some pedal board services, not built by me, but by approved rig builders that we are going to collaborate with. But also we want to really make sure that everybody knows where all the rig builders are around the world, because there are different, there's different people for different types of rigs, and there's certain builders that may be optimal for one rig over the other, and there might be some rig builders that might make more sense to you to use because of their location relative to your proximity. So we're going to be coming out with a video shortly that actually Mahia is working on right now, which is about how much pedal boards should cost. So giving people a real understanding of what goes into building a pedal board, the time that it takes to build a pedal board, the hourly rates associated, and sort of the spectrum depending on experience and things like that we see amongst rig builders. And this isn't like tattletaling or naming any of their rates. This is kind of speaking in generalizations based on the published rates that we know of for, from small builders to big legacy builders, and not assigning those price points to them, but kind of giving the spectrum of what the hourly rates look like, and then how that kind of breaks down in terms of material cost and stuff like that. Because I think a lot of times when people think about costs of pedal boards, and I can say this from somebody that was doing it for a long time for hire, that I think a lot of times people misunderstood the difference between material costs and labor. And I think when they would get a quote for a pedal board, I think that they would sometimes have a difficult time parsing that probably 50% of the cost of the rig is just parts, especially if you want to use good stuff. Like if you want to use good, high quality, reliable stuff, it's expensive. And if you're trying to get your builder to cut down on the price, and they're not going to eat into their labor costs, it's going to affect the quality of the parts that you end up getting. So we kind of create a little bit of context for that, and then name all of the pedal board builders that we're aware of regionally all across the world, so you can find somebody as local as possible to you that builds, including our very own Vince. So yeah, that'll be coming soon. I want a new overdrive or distortion, but can't decide the Kilt or Benson preamp. I think I hear both, but for me, they have the same application, but I feel with more compression, the Kilt. Can you give me your opinion? I've never played them side by side. My understanding is that the Kilt is more distorted than the preamp is, but I don't know. I think it depends on. Yeah, it's really hard to say because some of this stuff is like personal tastes. Like I may really love blueberry pancakes, and I tell everybody they should eat blueberry pancakes, but it turns out that you hate blueberries. So you're probably not going to like the blueberry pancakes that I talk about as being the best pancakes in the world. So I would say, Adrian, if there's any way that you can try them, I would. Or if you can buy them from a place that has a really relaxed return policy, so you have the opportunity to really see how they sound, how they feel under your fingers, I'd recommend this. I don't have enough experience with those two pedals against each other to really say. I think the Kilt sounds great. It's definitely like a higher gain, more distortion than the preamp when I remember playing that, or kind of feeling like what the sweet spot of that pedal was. They both are great pedals. Let's see. I'm skipping around here. I'll come back. I find Midi through must have the presets you're calling on the same bank locations to be able to program changes. Is there a way around that? Well, you should be able to still transmit it on different channels, different Midi channels. It shouldn't have any effect on it. I'm waiting for FedEx to deliver my Vertex Boost Mark II right now. Amazing. Thank you, D-Man, for all of the support. Larry, I will use an Eventide H9 Max and a Fuzz Mutron, 1 or 2 expression pedals, Eventide harmonizer pedal, G3 programmable box looper, and a good synth pedal. All right, well, I think you should tell your prospective pedalboard builder, maybe Vince, and he can do the rest. I love the G3. Those things are sweet, says Stride. Dave also likes the XTS pedal brand and their buffers. Yeah, I think that they make buffer boxes, like custom ones as well. We've talked about them a couple of times. And I think LA Sound Design has his own like a proprietary buffer interface box that you can buy that has like isolation and stuff like that in there. I think that he's friends with what's the other owners? Barry O'Neill is like kind of like the engineer guy that does the pedal designs and is involved with the pedal boards. And then I think it's Greg Walton. I think he was an investor in LA Sound Design kind of earlier on. I think now he's not affiliated, but I think that those guys were all friends from way back when. So they all I think kind of got into the business together at the same time. So yeah, I'm sure that they all would speak highly of each other. Where do I put an HX Stomp in the signal chain? Wow, well, it really depends on what you use it for, because some guys are just like, hey, I'm just using it modulation, delay, reverb, and then I got an all analog, kind of overdrive section and compression, stuff like that. In that case, it's an easy case to say use it last. But there's some people that will use like the effects loop of it and put certain pedals in there so that they can use the HX Stomp before or after it, depending on what the effects that they want. So they'll create like a block. They'll put the effects loop before that, those block of different effects. And so in that way they have some flexibility. Or in that rig that I talked about earlier, about that kind of SRV John Mayer rig that used an HX effects, I put a switcher in the effects loop and then used the HX effects as a controller for the pedals that I had, the analog pedals that I had in the switcher. And so I could actually use it as a glorified switcher and use the different effects blocks and put my analog devices between different effects, which is a really cool way to get a tremendous amount of bang for the buck. That was a really, really cool rig. And I did have to get a little help from Line 6 because I had some difficulty at first getting on MIDI program, but Matt Ferguson, shout out to him from Line 6, got me hooked up with somebody to kind of figure that out. Now it's totally easy, but it took me a second to get it working exactly the way that I wanted to. But it's a really fun application. That Pedalboard's really cool. Hey Mark, okay, High Water just weighing in, puts it at the end. I'm a bit late, but do you know the Ultraphonics HRM can melt your face off? Most of the demos I've seen have been pretty chill, but this thing screams. It does have a lot more gain than the regular Ultraphonics. I will say that for sure. My definition of hell is making right angle MIDI cables. The recesses in the right angle plug are ridiculously shallow. Any tricks? Okay. So first thing is that by using a TRS cable for this, a thinner mic cable, twisted pair shielded, it certainly makes it a lot easier because you have a little bit more space to deal with than if you're dealing with 5 conductors, right? Or 4 conductors and a shield. So usually what I like to do is I will tin, and I show this in the video, I'll tin all the tabs first. And then what I'll do is I'll cut down the shield considerably, because usually the amount of copper wire that's on the shield is way more than you need in order to create the shield. Because remember, as soon as the spiral shield or the braided shield enters into the actual housing of the actual insulator of the outer diameter insulator, everything's touching everything anyway. So it's not like you're going to get, and you're also getting shielding from the actual housing of the plug. So it's not a big deal if you cut down some of the shield. Usually I lose half of the shield right away. So I'll kind of like, separate it braided, or if the braided shield, or separate the spiral shield, cut half of it away so that the diameter of the shield is brought down quite a bit. Then I will, trim off a slight bit of the insulators on the two other center conductor leads, tin a little bit of that. I'll pre-tin those lugs, and then I'll kind of just heat them up and just slide them in really carefully. And on the shield, I'll probably braid it tight, but only tin the very edge, and just make sure that there's no other wires that are coming off it, because I want the flexibility. If I tin the whole thing, it can be a little bit stiff, especially if you're going to be using those clocking right angle plugs. You don't want to have a really stiff shield as that's happening. It can put a lot of stress on that connection of the cable. That's typically how I do it, but I think a lot of those are gone over in our video where we talk about making MIDI cables. So Jordan, I would check that out, and if you have any questions from there, you can always throw that in the comment section of this video. How do you feel about Goodwood Audio, the interfacer? I think that they pretty much are the only guys that do that level of customization. So I think if you need that level of customization, it's the best possible thing that you could get, because most people are not going to offer you every possible contingency, for stereo to mono to audition loops to passive inputs to all the other things that they offer. I think if you need that level of customization, they're the only game in town. So I think on that, they win automatically. I bought an HRM and get all kinds of stuff out of it, even fuzz. Yeah, if you turn up the treble control enough, which is like the middle tone control, you can get fuzz out of it almost. Like it'll start to oscillate almost. Are there presets available for the John Mayer SRV-HX Stomp rig you built? I'll see if I still have some, Jeffrey. Throw me a comment reminder in this video, and if I have them, I'll send you links to them. I think I might still have some that I save. So if I do, I'm happy to share them. So the HX Stomp I'm using is as an amp and for modulation. Well, I think in that case you have no choice. You're using it last if it's the amp. Just built my first pedal board and noticed right when I turn the power, there's a lot of noise or static for like the first 20 seconds, and then it all kind of fades. Is that power supply noise? Well, sometimes you can get some like startup noise from certain devices. Usually digital devices will have like a little startup noise where you might hear like, I don't know, some sort of like kind of digital sounds, maybe some maybe like it'll turn itself on and off, and then if it's like a reverb or a delay, you might hear it kind of like trail a little bit, and then it like shuts itself off. I've seen instances like that, but to really tell you, I'd probably need to see it. If you want to video it and throw a link in a comment with a video of what you're hearing, I could probably give you a better idea of what it might be. But without hearing it, it might be hard for me to tell you exactly. So you're welcome to do that, and I'm happy to oblige in the comments. But guys, that was cool. I know we just about did an hour. We're gonna go over to the private stream, which is not as like fancy as it sounds, but it's just for people that are supporting members that have paid accounts and join us either through Patreon or therigdr.com. But I wanted to be able to create a free account that costs zero money, and we do have an option for a free account that costs zero money. The problem is that it's very difficult to synchronize logistically with Patreon, because Patreon does not allow for a $0 version of Patreon. So the best that I could do with Patreon is I did create what I'm calling the almost free account. This is the lowest dollar amount that they would allow me to enter. And so if you want to be part of the private stream, we do a private stream every week after the public stream. And this just gets into maybe more detail. Maybe you get a little bit of an inside scoop about some of the things that are coming down the pipeline, some of the prototypes that I'm working on. You get an inside scoop on some of the pedalboard related stuff, and you get access to products before they hit the public. In most cases, there's been some cases where we haven't been able to do that because we signed exclusivity deals with certain dealerships of ours that were going to be the first to break the product publicly. But in most cases, you get early access to things. You get a 15% off coupon that you get to use on anything from Vertex related or Rig Doctor related. So the best I could do to kind of keep everything synchronized, there's a $1 a month. So it's $12 a year and you get all those benefits. You can join us there. And then we have other levels. If you want custom wiring diagrams for us to do for you, or design your signal path, or get one-on-one consulting, we offer different options here. So you're welcome to join us there. All those include the private Q&A that we do after the public live stream every Friday. So if you want to join us, head over to the patreon.com/rigdoctor. I'll throw it in the comments here. If you want to join us, come over and do it. If you want a free account and you don't want to pay the $1 a month, $12 a year, you can email Mejia. I'll put his email here, Mejia@vertexeffects.com, and he can give you a truly free account that doesn't cost anything. Again, we don't want money to stand between you and great tone. The only reason why we had to create the $1 one is that there are some people that truly can't afford any of the other options, and so we wanted to be able to give them a way to do that. It's just hard for us logistically to synchronize them with Patreon, because stuff that goes out to all of our Patreon people can't extend to a non-paid account, so we have to like physically like recopy all of that, whatever the information is, and then like email it directly to that person, which just creates a few more steps for us. We're willing to do it, but if you have the ability to be able to afford the $1 a month, we suggest that you join in on the Patreon, mostly just for logistics sake, and it's easier for us to be in communication with you and get you the same information that all the other membership gets, as far as the weekly Q&As. So please do join us if you'd like. If you enjoyed it today, give us a thumbs up. That goes a long way. And Mejia will be sending out the private stream link through Patreon momentarily, so if you're waiting for that, go ahead and do that. And if you want to join us today, it's not too late. You can sign right up. You can join even at the $1 level, and you'll get all the information to go to the private stream right after that. All right, guys, have a great weekend. We'll see you later.